Hello, this is Bryan Fulford with the Black College Sports Network, and it is my pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with the commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, Dr. Charles McClelland, taking some time out of his busy schedule during these unusual and unique times that we are living in. Dr. McClelland, how are you doing this afternoon, sir?
Doing well. How's everything going on your end?
It's going well. First off, I've got to ask, how are you, your family, and the SWAC staff doing as it relates to the coronavirus and things that we're experiencing right now?
Everyone's doing well. We are practicing social distancing as recommended. We're working from home. There are several individuals coming in and out of the office, but no more than 2 at a time. So we're making sure that we adhere to all of the federal, state, and local mandates and guidelines, just trying to do our part and help curtail the spread of this virus so we can get back to the wonderful world of athletics.
Has it, and I know for me personally, sports has been a great distraction, as it is for, I'm sure, a lot of us who are involved in sports and love sports. What kind of things? Obviously, you have a major business that you are in charge of or you oversee. But what has these past 2 weeks been like for you personally, without the distraction of sports?
Well, being commissioner, there's always the administrative side, and that's ultimately what we concentrate here in the office anyway, is the administrative side of sports. So what we've done over the last 2 weeks is diligently to try to shut down. There are several contracts that we have. We had cities that we had championships in. So there are a lot of things that we have to do from an administrative standpoint. But I, like everyone else, struggling of not having any sports in our lives, being on the Division I men's basketball committee. I have these daily calendar pop-ups to let me know where I'm supposed to be, catching flights, going to this meeting, being at this site. I woke up this morning and it was almost like Groundhog Day. Same thing. Wake up, go to your routine, try to sneak to the office. Wife yelling at you for leaving. Try to come home, watch a little TV, go to sleep, wake up, do it again. So it's been relatively difficult being in athletics, in the athletics arena as a professional for the last 21 years. It's been a struggle, but several conference calls with membership schools, several conference calls with the NCAA. Still a lot of work to be done to try to sort out, what are the next steps.
Right. I'm just curious. You mentioned your calendar of where you were supposed to be, possibly if things were things were normal, to say the least. Where might you be today, or where might you have been yesterday if the schedule was as it was planned?
Well, right now I'm looking at my calendar. I would have had a flight to leave Birmingham at 10:04 Central Time, and seeing that we're in that time now, I would be in the air headed to Indianapolis, Indiana for the regional round of the NCAA tournament. So it's a grim reminder that this coronavirus is serious. I think it's also a reminder that sports, although it is big business, there's a lot of money, it's extracurricular, it's for entertainment. And I think this virus has allowed all of us to put that into perspective. Great point.
Indianapolis being my hometown, I was supposed to be on a flight last weekend heading to Indianapolis just to visit my parents, and at the advice of my doctor, I chose not to go. But I understand. I understand completely. In your 20 plus years of being in athletics, there hasn't been anything like this, but has there been anything that you could look on and say maybe you were able to draw some knowledge, or maybe hey, we've been in something like this, or some experience? Is there anything that you've experienced, even a small percent, like this, what we're in right now?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, we had the swine flu outbreak The H1N1, I think, is what's the swine flu. And I was athletics director at Texas Southern University, and we had our big Texas Southern track relays, and it was right at the height of the swine flu outbreak in Houston. Nothing like this, not a national, worldwide pandemic. As you look now, cities are starting to shut down. I just looked and saw where Dallas shut down a couple of days ago, and Houston is shutting down tonight, where the roads are empty. There's nothing like this that I don't think any of us in our lifetime has seen. I think you got to go back to the 1900s, early 1900s, when I think it was polio, to even be able to get an understanding of how this virus has affected, everyone's daily lives. So I think the swine flu, similar symptoms, similar recommendations, distance yourself, wash your hands, hand sanitizer. But if I recall, in that swine flu epidemic, once it got hot, it just kind of went away. This is not predicted to do that. So you're talking, literally 5.5 months. My two sons are in college, Division I basketball players, and I told them to come home immediately. And when you look up, it's March, and it's going to be July, August before most people are anticipating kind of getting back to normal. But from institutions of higher education, especially within the Southwestern Athletic Conference, the majority of our institutions have already stated summer is going to be online as well. So you're talking 5.5 months of not being in your regular routine for them and everybody else. So I don't think that, in our lifetime we've seen anything like this.
I wanted to take a moment and I'm always fascinated at and I think anybody who can look at and think about how things progressed 3-4 weeks ago and sort of the timeline and the movement. I'm interested from an administrative level of some of the difficult decisions and the challenge and the information that you had and the decisions that you and your staff had to make. You're coming right into the middle of the tournament, the men and women's basketball tournament, and I was just looking back at the news releases where on one day on March 3rd, you're celebrating or sort of making folks aware of the purchase of the new corporate office buildings. And then the next day you're discussing about the plans for the basketball tournament as the news of the coronavirus is starting to spread. From that moment where you're talking about the plans for the basketball tournament, and I can't recall whether that actually included the plan to play the tournament without fans, what things went into that process, or how are the decisions come to? How are they made based off the information you're given at that point in things that were going on?
Well, I think the first information item that we put out to the public was that we are aware of the coronavirus. We are moving forward with our tournament. We've been working with the local health officials, and then we put out what we thought or what was recommended from the health officials. Wash your hands. If you're sick, stay at home. Hand sanitizer. We had a plan that we were going to have extra hand sanitizers and sanitizer dispensing stations set up around the arena. And that's pretty much what, everyone was doing. I think what the public probably should know is that there are 32 conferences. We call ourselves the Commissioners Association, CCA, Conference Commissioners Association. And we all talk. We all share information. Right. So some have already had their tournaments going. We got best practices from what they were doing. But this virus really, kind of took off. And if you go through the timeline, it really was week 2 when the majority of the people were starting their tournaments where the information just started to bombard you. I think fortunately for me, I was in the room with the basketball committee, so I was able to get updates via the NCAA. On that committee, there are representatives from the majority of the Power 5 conferences. There's a representative from the Atlantic 10. So I was getting real-time information about what was going on with everyone's tournament. We were getting information updates from the NCAA. They have a board, even on their advisory board, a former Surgeon General is on the board. So they have a chief medical doctor that's a part of that, advisory board. So we were getting constant updates. So as we were putting out information, we were getting real-time information, not just from, the NCAA and being in the boardroom, but we were getting real-time information from the other conference championships. But I think we went from we're going to have hand sanitizing stations to we're going to play without fans to the next day that we're going to cancel it altogether. It was all in a line of information updates. And when we realized that this virus was spreading at the rate that it was, as dangerous as it was, we had to kind of come to the realization that the health and safety of America was more important than basketball, which, that sounds like a pretty simple decision. But as you know, basketball, especially in March, it's far-reaching, I guess is the word that I want to use, not just from an economic standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint and, in some instances, such as mine, from a sanity standpoint. So once we realized that we needed to start look at reasons why we shouldn't play versus starting to try to look at all of the reasons why we should, once we switched that thinking, that's when you started to see in a 2-day time frame going from playing all together with fans to not playing at all. And I think the tipping point, and I think you've probably heard this, is when Rudy Gobert tested positive and the NBA shut their season down. I think that was a wake-up call for all of us. So I was in the middle of the room, in the middle of the process, so I was able to get information and be able to update. And fortunately for us, we had the first round on the campuses, and then we ascended to Birmingham for a Friday game. We canceled ours on Thursday. Fortunately for us, we were not like others where the games had already begun. And we had to pull people off. So we were able to communicate with our membership, get them turned around for those that were not there, for those that were here, get them set up and then back to their city. So difficult decisions, but, one that we were not making in a vacuum. Everyone was talking. Everyone was sharing information.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was, thinking that the Rudy Gobert and the NBA situation really, as you mentioned, kind of flipped the switch or sort of changed the tide probably in a lot of people's thought processes. I hate to speculate and do what ifs, but do you think had that not happened when it did, that maybe games would have been played? And, who knows what might have happened later, but, not to play that game, but had that not happened when it did, do you think games probably would have gone on, at least for another day or two?
Yeah, I think you probably would have gotten those Thursday games in. I don't see it going any further than Thursday. Again, with all of the information that was coming in, it was just a matter of time. I think Rudy Gobert's announcement on that Wednesday night had everybody talking Wednesday night through Thursday morning, and that's when people started to cancel. But the way that the information was coming, the flow of the information, it was happening, whether the NCAA and the member conferences were moving or not, it was going to happen. So I'm 100% positive we would never have made it to Sunday. I'm 100% positive that the NCAA tournament was never going to happen, based upon the flow of information and the express, I guess, of the information being put out as to the relevancy of how this virus was spreading and social distancing. We were never going to get to Sunday or selection.
The as you mentioned, not only the economic, but the I don't know how to describe it. Maybe the mental enjoyment that we get as fans, and then the economic impact that the NCAA tournament and just the conference tournaments have for conferences and just the tournament overall. I'm sure that had to be. I hate to say, as you compare public health and safety versus that, I'm sure there had to be some unease in some places. You mentioned being in those NCAA meetings. I'm sure there had to be some uneasiness about what kind of economic impact, and I don't mean to say that as if anybody was thinking dollars over lives, but can you describe maybe, some of that uneasiness, or just was there any planning or any just how does that work? What's that like in that room as that realization is coming to be?
Well, there was very little discussion about the economic impact. I think everyone in the room understood what the NCAA tournament brings, not only to the conferences and the member institutions, but, I would say the world.
Right.
We saw some figure where Vegas lost $500 million on betting off of the NCAA tournament, so it kind of spreads. But I don't think any of us had any sustaining conversation about the economic impact. I think all of us understood it, but the health and safety was of the utmost priority. I think the majority of the conversation really went to the student athlete and how they felt, and the mental health of the student athlete, going from getting ready to play in a tournament to not seeing your friends or your teammates, some ever for the
right.
remaining of the year. Some are graduating, and now you're online, so you went from being on a bus getting ready to go to the tournament to saying your final goodbyes. Student athletes don't have homes to go to or can't get to homes. Those were the concerns that we talked about mostly. How do we handle that? How do we put a plan in place for the most vulnerable? We know the fans are going to be able to adapt and adjust. ESPN and CBS, I've watched all of those old replays, right?
Right.
1982 Georgetown championship, the 1983 U of H versus North Carolina State, the Christian Leighton
classic game.
Shot
classic
over.
Game.
Dude, so all of those, over Kentucky, all of those games are being replayed. We'll find something,
Right.
I've heard that there were several people betting on what the weather was going to be like. Leave it to us, we'll make it up. But those student athletes were the ones that we were most concerned about, and having things in place to ensure that they were going to be safe.
In terms of communicating to the student athletes, and how did that go? Did it come from you? Did you make some sort of statement or comment? Did it, was it left up to the schools?
Yeah, we put out a statement, but I can assure you that I'm smart enough to know student athletes don't really care what the commissioner, has to say. I think,
sure.
The member institutions are the entities that the student athletes are really honed into. And being an athletics director, I'm, again, equally astute to know that the coaches are the front line of communication when it comes to student athletes. Student athletes, for the most part, go to those institutions based upon their personal relationships with the coaches. So when you're talking about movement, it starts with the coaches. So we wanted to equip member institutions with all of the correct information. We had several conference calls with the president, the athletic directors, for them to be able to give all of the information that they needed to coaches. So, yes, we did put out a statement, but under no circumstance did we think that our word was going to be that signaling factor that was going to get them to feel good about what was going on. And it really was those personal relationships that they had with
right.
the coaches and the academic advisors and administrators. And we relied upon them to do much of the heavy lifting. We just wanted to equip them with all of the information. But, in the era of social media, I have two sons. Both were on their way to Birmingham. One actually made it to Birmingham. One got turned around 15 minutes into their trip coming to the tournament. They were texting me while I was on all of these various conference calls trying to figure it out. And when they heard the SEC cancel their tournament and the Big Ten cancel and the ACC, their question was, well, I know we're next.
Right.
And my wife responded to the group text and said, hey, your dad's on a conference call. He'll call you in about an hour. And they both simultaneously responded and said, well, we know it's canceled. Daddy can't respond to us, and he's on a conference call, and everybody else canceled. We know ours are canceled. So, again, in this wonderful world of social media, they're smart. You know, they're getting the information. They knew what was coming. They were just waiting on the official word. So it's not like you can hide it or do anything. Social media is a very effective tool of communication, and our student athletes are very astute. So they had an idea even before we made the announcement.
The announcement of the cancellation of the tournament was followed a day later with the cancellation of all spring sports. I thought it was, you know, again, thinking back on the timeline and looking at how things were worded, and now hearing what your access to information, it makes sense now reading that the cancellation of all spring sports happened versus the postponement. And I know there were a lot of back and forth in different social media groups and people saying, well, why not just suspend it and wait to see what happens? But you obviously knowing the information, I mean, that had to be a very tough decision, or maybe it was, you know, the decision that you just knew had to be made at that point of canceling versus postponing.
Well, it was an easy decision because we had the information that the virus was going to last into the summer. We had the information that other conferences were canceling their spring sports. And I think and some had already canceled. I think the biggest backlash was Greg Sankey from the SEC saying, we think it's a little premature to cancel spring sports because we don't know what the virus is going to do. But I was locked into a room talking to individuals that I was probably getting a little bit more information that made me feel comfortable enough. I was very clear at the time that we put it out that this virus was not going to be a 1-month virus or a 2-month virus. This was going to stretch on. Plus, I remember institutions had already made decisions that once their student athletes left for spring break, they were not going to allow them back because once they went to all of these various places, they didn't want them. So it would have been impossible for us to host spring championships because I had information that our schools were not going to allow student athletes back. So our announcement made it easier for the schools to do what they needed to do. But also I had inside information as to the direction that the nation was headed. Ultimately, it's headed in that direction. And keep in mind, too, sports for the Southwestern Athletic Conference is a little different than what it is for the Power Five, right? The Power Five have the wherewithal to be able to bring their student athletes back, put them in a hotel, feed them, transport them, give them tests, do all of the things that you have to do because they have these huge television contracts. The majority of the conferences don't. That's why they call them the Group of Five and the Power Five, and then you have everybody else, right? There are 32 conferences. 22 of us are in the same boat. I would say maybe 20. When you look at the Big East, they probably have a little bit more wherewithal because of their basketball, and Atlantic 10 has a little bit more wherewithal, but they're still kind of in the same boat. They are conferences that get the predominantly basketball money when I say in the same boat. So when you start talking about baseball, they don't have huge baseball contracts like the SEC and the ACC. So it was going to be impossible for our member institutions to be able to do the type of things that they needed to do in order to even try to salvage a spring sport. So it was a very, easy decision because from a financial standpoint, our student athletes not being on campus, what it was going to take for our campuses to restart just to be able to get a baseball team back to have a 1-month season to try to get a championship done, that you can't even go to the NCAA championship, knowing that legislation was going to come down that was going to give student athletes their spring sports back. It was just an easy decision. Maybe everybody didn't understand it at the time, but for us, we had the information and we knew what direction we were going and what direction the NCAA and the nation was going.
I'm curious, how challenging is it when you have access to this kind of information that obviously it felt like the general public or the majority of the public didn't have, probably a majority of sports media entities don't have. How challenging is it to, as you release information, as you word things, to do it in a way that is responsible, but does it, that gets the message across to the people it needs to get to, but not create, I guess, a panic among larger groups? Is there any challenges with that?
Well, I would say no, only because it was just us coming to the realization. Every bit of information that I had was already out in the public. It was just a matter of whether or not you believe the individuals that were putting it out there. People had called for the tournaments to be canceled, a week before we even started the tournaments. People had called for spring sports to be shut down long before. People had said that this virus was going to get serious in the United States. We just ignored it. People said that multiple people were going to get sick. We just ignored it. People said social distance yourself and wash your hands. People just ignored it. So the only thing that we did was take the information and believe the information because, again, we were trying to find a reason to play versus looking at all of the reasons not to play. So it was really just a shift in thinking. But I don't think that it was difficult at all because the information was already there. But when an entity such as the NBA and the NCAA and the NHL and the MLB says, well, we're going to shut it down, then it has to be serious, right? Because sports, we drive a lot. And if we shut it down, now you start to see cities start to shut it down because, in fairness, there were some cities, there were some states that started to shut it down. Ohio started to shut it down. The state of Washington started to shut it down. So the information was out there. It was just really a matter of us listening and saying, okay, let's do what's right for the health and safety of America, not necessarily what's right for the sport of basketball. So, I don't think we had any information other than, the specific people that we were talking to, but it was the same information that was already put out there from a public perspective. It was just a matter of whether or not you agreed or bought into what the individuals were saying. We made the decision that we had to agree and buy in that not playing was the best thing to do, and that's ultimately what we did. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. That's a good point. I mean, who we listened to and whether we wanted to believe it or not, and it is funny thinking back. It was all there in front of us. It just, as you said, well, who did we want to believe it? I appreciate your time. I don't want to take up too much more of it, but I did want to ask, as you obviously continue the job of planning forward, which I'm sure helps. With not only just maybe your sanity, but just keeping in a positive thoughts. This summer and this upcoming season that is going to be the 100th year of Southwestern Athletic Conference athletics. Big plans were in place for the summer. Can you share any thoughts about those plans from that were scheduled for the summer? To celebrate the 100th year and just fall sports. Is there anything that you can share with us about the planning process as it is today?
Yeah, we're going to make an official announcement about the 100th sometime this week, but for all practical purposes, we're going to not have that event in July. It's got to be too close, or, we don't know. This virus and this pandemic still could be going on at that particular time, but we do know, and we've been planning this thing now for about a year, but about 70% of the people that we're going to be honoring and about 70% of the people that are going to be there are going to be the elderly and individuals with underlying health conditions, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to put them at risk.
Right.
At the same time, all 10 member institutions have theoretically shut down operations, although they're operating. They're not at full capacity. There's no way that we can get this done without the help of our 10-member institutions. So we don't want to put that extra burden and that extra load on them. And, it's just not prudent to try to force an event in mid-July, knowing that you're only going to have a month at best to try to get it done. We don't want to do that. We don't want to put people at risk just, for the sake. We can have a celebration later on, but our thinking is that for the health and safety, it is prudent for us not to have that event in July. But we have other opportunities and other time to do it. So we're probably going to cancel that July event and look at another opportunity to do something similar. But that final decision hasn't been made, but I can tell you we're probably 95 to 99% sure that we will cancel that event for July and try to reschedule something similar at a later date.
Understood. Well, again, Dr. McClelland, I appreciate you taking some time out today, and I appreciate you just sharing some of the background. I mean, for me personally, I'm always interested in the decision-making, and there's some valuable lessons I think that can be learned, and later on in years down the road, I'm sure other people and leaders will look back on these decisions and be able to use them in a way, to help guide us going forward. So again, I wish you and the staff much health, good health, and we look forward to possibly talking again in a couple of months, just kind of seeing where things are and where the planning of the fall, because I know that's what's keeping us going. I'm starting to see a lot of things on social media. There's a lot of fall sports talk is going on. So hopefully that keeps us in a bright spirit during these unusual times.
Well, I would say this to all of the fans that are listening. If you want fall sports, the best thing you can do is, stay indoors. And I think that's ultimately what America has been told for the last couple of weeks. And I know it's tough. It's tough for me. But until we can get this thing curtailed, it's only going to take more time. So if there's anything that you think you can do to get football kicked off, it is to stay inside. And if you stay inside, I guarantee you we'll have football. So the only way we're going to have football is, to curtail it. And the only way to curtail it is to quarantine yourself until we can get a handle on it. So everybody has to do their part for football. We're going to do ours, and we hope that you do yours. And if you do, there's a 100% guarantee we'll play. But if we don't sit and quarantine ourselves and social distance ourselves from each other, it could jeopardize our ability to play football in the fall. So this stuff is serious, and it's not going to go away by itself. We have to do our part. So I just urge everybody to do so.
That's a great public service announcement. Thank you, Dr. McClelland, again for your time. Have a great day, and we appreciate you taking time to talk with us again.
Okay, thank you.